Bilal bhai?
I'm, I apologize. I'm not sure why my laptop isn't responding well. Uh,
You look great, and we see you and we can hear you.
okay, so I apologize for a little bit of amateur style video display here. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I've been asked to speak on a topic patience, prayers, and having gone through a trial myself recently is perhaps the reason why I was approached for this subject. Although I by no means consider myself good at prayers, I don't consider myself good at patience, and in fact, I consider myself a novice at both of these. But I have some experience enough to know that these are very important. And without these two very essential things, there is no way that one can see themselves through difficult trials in life, which inevitably Allah Ta'ala will send our way. So, by the way, this experience has nothing to do with me. This is something that some of you are very young, I'm seeing in the crowd, and you think that you have your health, you have your parents, you have all sorts of comforts. You don't have responsibilities that adults have. What type of trials might I see? And this is a question that we can ask, or you can ask yourself during this session and find the answers for. But there is an experience of difficulty and hardship, which I didn't expect, that I had recently. And I'll start by sharing that a few years ago, I began having some symptoms, which were very innocuous at the time, just a cough, and gradually developed into some shortness of breath. And then I started having some joint pains. And, first they thought maybe it's just some acid reflux. Long story short, I went to the hospital, they did a scan, and much to their surprise, and my own, of course, they found that I had a very late stage lung disease called pulmonary fibrosis. And that came with a bad prognosis, one that I wasn't prepared to hear. And as fate would have it, just a couple hours later, I received a call from my father's doctor. And he said, the biopsy results are in for your father, and the news is not good. Like, he has cancer, and it's stage 4, meaning, this is something that's managed basically for symptoms and not for a long-term cure. So both of these pieces of information came the same day within a matter of a couple hours. Both end stage type of diseases, and that carried very bad prognoses. And then within a few months, some sort of similar, my mother's health also hasn't been well, and she's also been given, prognostic indications from doctors and what. So all this sort of happened all at the same time. And there's expressions that they have, and idioms about how trials come in certain groups and so on, and that can happen in life. And there's a year of grief for the Holy Prophet ﷺ's own life, where there were certain trials that Allah Ta'ala sent his way. His wife died, his uncle died, there was a boycott, they faced hunger, and these are very, very serious trials that really throw you off your balance. And the objective is that that's actually the point, because in those times of trial is when one really reaches deep down and searches for God like they've never searched quite for him before. They utter prayers in such desperate ways that they never thought that they could ever make. And you have no choice but to be brutally honest with Allah Ta'ala about how incapable you are to go through this trial on your own, how desperate you are, how afraid you are. And mind you, you don't say these things to other people. You don't say them to your family or to your friends. You say, for them, you put on a smile, and you remember that in our bath, in the 10 conditions of bath, the seventh condition of bath says that we will pledge to be cheerful in all times. So you remain cheerful. And before God, you remain honest, whatever that means. If that means that you're in pain and you're suffering and that you're losing your grip, that you're losing your faith, then you tell him that. And you ask for his help. And this is no time when you're facing any kind of hardship for any type of pride or arrogance. Actually, in reality, the time for that is now. When the time of hardship comes, it's too late. You have to prepare the soil of your heart now, so that when trial does come, it can sprout the right type of prayers and responses that need to be seen in a true believer. What is that preparation? One of them is humility. And we need to, I'm sorry, I had so many quotes of Masih Maud and Quran and Ahadith that I had open on my laptop, which now is not serving much help for me because of technical issues. So I'm going to have to go off memory, but in summaries. But that preparation is, we have to lose our belief that we are good, somehow good on our own. None of us are good on our own. We are only good because of Allah Ta'ala's grace. All of us have arrogance. None of us here are Khalifatul Masih. Okay, we all have arrogance. We all have pride. We all think we're special to some extent, maybe perhaps some less than others, that's fine. But more or less, all of us have some degree of arrogance in us. And if you're faced with some sort of trial, it'll be harder for you to accept that with humility. Allah Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, to have patience and prayer, and it'll be difficult for you unless you have humility. If you have humility, it will be easy for you. In Surah Al-Baqarah. So, and mind you, in this verse of Quran, sabr is patience is mentioned first, and then prayer is mentioned, which is an interesting sequence. Both obviously are essential, but I tell you that at times one can observe, or at least I observed in myself, that perhaps we're good at prayers, or in the routine of prayers, we're good in paying chanda, but how good are we at patience? It's sometimes patience that's lacking, not our performance of prayers or giving of chanda, but our patience. And when that's tested, that's when the true content of someone's character comes out. And the Prophet ﷺ reminded us that, look, if you really want to have true progress, spiritual progress, it can only come through trial. It cannot come through an easy life. And he said that 124,000 prophets, their lives bear testimony to us that if you want to achieve great spiritual heights, then you have to be able to bear great hardships with patience. Otherwise, how do great qualities even arise in a believer? They can't come from ease and comfort and joys and pleasures. the greater and hidden inner qualities cannot come to the fore unless one is truly tested and put through pain and hardship. Maybe some listening are thinking that what are these abstractions he's talking about? I've never really had that much hardship, but I tell you, don't underestimate, no matter how young you are, how difficult even your life next week or has been. Maybe you're thinking, no, in fact, it does get hard. Although I may have objectively a different hardship, but subjectively it may be the same to you. There's a saying that a child's toy is the same as the loss of a child's toy to him is the same as the loss of a king's crown to the king. Meaning that if a child loses a doll and if a king loses a kingdom, the eternal law of proportion demands that these are the same to each. So I tell you that even if you have an exam that you're preparing for and so much rides on it, so much hinges on it, your future, your parents' hopes and dreams, your own hopes and dreams, your admission tests, these are trials for you. And if my trial can get me closer to God, then your trials can get you closer to Him too. So these are some things that I wish to share. I'm not a murabbi. I don't have the best knowledge, and perhaps some things I've spoken today were not articulated entirely accurately. And in a moment, if we have a question and answer session, I may be able to answer some of your questions, but only because I might have had some experience, not because I'm older in knowledge or I'm an elder in wisdom. I'm just an elder, perhaps a little bit in age, but that's all. And I do want to stress this idea that we need to be honest about our own arrogance. This is very important because when we are tried with suffering and pain or loss of any kind, you cannot truly beg humbly on your knees, on your hands, and with your forehead on the ground in that utter state, unless you're truly humble at heart and you really consider yourself nothing. And you really realize that without Allah Ta'ala's help, I mean, you're going to hit the ground. We talk about holding on to the rope of Allah. And when we feel our hands slip, and at times if we feel like we've even let go of the rope and we're falling, it's a complete free fall and there's nothing between you and the ground. And you can only pray from the depth of your heart that Allah Ta'ala save me somehow, because I can't do it on my own. I'm an empty cup. I'm not even the cup. You gave me the cup. You filled the cup. I cannot do this on my own. And how long can I last? These types of prayers you have to write in your own words. Salat is the bedrock. It's the foundation. But it's just the beginning. Your salat is not the true objective, actually. It is the foundation, the basis for which all of Islam lies. But the objective is not to stop when salat stops. What you achieve, the liqa, the relationship with God, the whole idea of salat is that it should extend past it. That you should pray nafal, or you should pray, do zikr, and talk to Allah Ta'ala like a friend. Walk with Him as though you're holding His hand, whether in joy or in trial. That's the real objective of salat. That's the whole idea, that you should have a personal relationship, unbreakable, that even transcends your salat time. And that's where dua takes its true color and flavor. to be honest, is when you pray to Allah Ta'ala in your own words, your own imagination, and develop a personal relationship with Him. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I had a lung transplant, and this was about several weeks ago, and that's the reason why I can't travel to Jalsa. And it was a difficult time, to be quite honest, for me in the hospital. I did not deal well with the pain and some other things. And it was a challenge to my nafs, and it helped a lot that Allah Ta'ala sent angels to help me in the form of friends through the Jamaat that were at my bedside, that held hands, that spent the night with me and helped me and saw, you know, how vulnerable one is. But I'll also say this, that, and I'm grateful for that, but the satisfaction that you get through prayer, you cannot achieve through brotherhood. You cannot get that through friends, even Jamaat friends. They're great. They are God's blessings after all. But your own relationship with God cannot be substituted for by anything. Okay, that you have to have a relationship with God. Even your friends can go away sometimes. Your friends can offend you. At some time, they're going to leave the hospital room. You'll be by yourself. What are you going to do then? You have to pray to God, and you have to find, and no one, sometimes there's an instruction manual. We all know what that is. Listening to khutbah, listening to Hazur's classes with children, Waqf children and Qadam classes. There are so many of those that are on YouTube, and they bring so much comfort during times of fear. Seeing how anxiety-free Khalifatul Masih is, and how effortlessly he solves all of these puzzling questions that these children ask, that honestly we all wonder, but they have the courage and innocence to ask Hazur. And you feel safe, and you see the proof of the existence of God through the Khalifa, that he has sent this man whose impeccable life is open before us, and who prays for us, and whom we send faxes to in times of hospitalization, in times of bad prognoses, and who responds to those letters and prayers in various ways. It's nothing that any religious community in the world enjoys but you and I. So these are some important things to know. And the Prophet Islam also told us that it doesn't matter what diagnosis a doctor or physician gives you. God has the power to change. Is the ultimate power rests with God when it comes to disease or illness. And he could even change his what he's determined within limits. So if I mean, not to get too personal, but I think we've all had many personal experiences with the power of prayer and how it can affect our lives. At times when we thought that that things were over, and the reality is that we actually are already a lot closer to death than we give it credit for, than we realize. And having, some of you probably have had car accidents where you didn't know, at least for a few seconds, whether you're going to be walking out of that dead or alive. And you had a close brush with death. Perhaps some months or years have passed and you've forgotten that feeling. But for a few weeks, you're probably very rocked and felt terrified and felt very close to God. And it's important for us to always chase that feeling and look for that feeling, because in reality, that is the true feeling, or that is the true reality, actually. That the death is just a second away. And when we have those experiences, we can see the boundary between this life and the next. And we begin thinking about the life we've lived and reflecting upon how we've treated others. My rights, have I given them to God? Have I given my rights to my neighbors, to my family members, to everybody else that Islam requires us to give rights to? The people that I've wronged, have I asked for forgiveness? Have I done istighfar? Have I paid off all my loans and debts? These are the questions that will prick you, and they need to be answered now. You need to do istighfar now. You should ask forgiveness of your family and friends that you've wronged now. You should treat your elders, your neighbors, your parents, your relatives, you should give them the due respect that they 100% deserve and that we never give them. Because when you are in that moment, you will not have the peace that you'd want to have, having left these things unresolved. Hazrat Maulvi Abdul Kareem Sialkoti Razi Allah Ta'ala anhu, he died at the age of 47. He was one of the most prominent and effective preachers, companions of the Prophet Messiah, Islam, one of his closest friends, and he died at a very young age. And in fact, he lived longer than he should have lived. It was only the prayers of the Prophet Messiah, Islam, that extended his life, which he had written about. And Allah Ta'ala sent him a message towards the end of his prayers, and he said to the Prophet Messiah, Islam, why do you give so much importance to the life of this world over the importance of the life of the next? So this, my dear brothers, children, and colleagues in Jamaat, is an important reminder to us that this life is temporary. It is not the real life. The real life is the next life, and that we have to keep that in mind. Whatever loss we suffer means nothing. And this life that we live of sort of neither here nor there, this needs to end. We cannot be half Muslim. It's not possible. You're not doing yourself any favor. You have to be all in. Otherwise, why are we Muslim? As I'm saying, is if we get to that point of death or near death, where you can see that boundary, you're going to be left thinking, why did I do this half? I should have done this all along, 100%. That's how we need to live. It needs to be black and white. You have to cross over. It's done. After all, everyone who lives in riches and luxury, don't they ultimately die anyway? They don't get to take any of that with them. It's all gone. It's meaningless. It feels like seconds, and it gives you no comfort. You know you're going to move into an afterlife. Far more probable than for you to go from something to something is far more probable than to having gone from nothing to something. This is a question that atheists cannot answer. They all admit freely that, look, yes, we came from nothing to something. And that probability is really improbable, but it happened. And the probability of going from something to something else is a lot higher, but that they cannot accept. So I tell you that we have so many proofs of the existence of God that we deny, And Allah Ta'ala sends us these reminders and these hardships, these trials, to remind us, to humble us, so we can turn to Him in prayer, supplication, and renew our pledge with Him, and be set aright. And so these are important things. I was also reminded of a hadith. It's actually not a hadith, but it's a narration of Hazrat Ibn Abbas, anhu, who was an uncle of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And he said that if you face loss in this world, know that there are three blessings that actually come. And those three blessings are, the first blessing is that it could always be worse. It can always be worse. Meaning if you lose one eye, you could have lost the other one. You know, you had a car accident, you survived, the car was totaled, but you could have died. Could always be worse. Number two, the loss that you suffer in this world, it's a worldly loss. It's not a spiritual loss. The real loss is spiritual loss. Losing your faith is loss. Not losing your house, your car, your health. These are not true losses, in fact. But losing your relationship with God is irreplaceable. And that's priceless. That you cannot lose. That's number two. Number three, the blessing of, hidden blessing of any loss that you face in this world, is that you faced that loss, you suffered that loss in this world and not the next. So these are three things to remind. And I tell you, if you ever have any kind of prolonged challenge or difficulty, so many people suffer from some sort of challenge. I won't, not everyone suffers from depression, but challenge. And sometimes it's long term. But just immerse yourself. And I've prepared a list of, I've kept a list of ahadith and saying malfuzat on hardship, trial, and the importance of prayer in order to remind myself. And that I would constantly reread those throughout these last few years to give me comfort and energy, because it runs out. Energy runs out, and you need to constantly re-up. And never think yourself too pious or that you've arrived and that you've achieved spiritual completion. You haven't. The moment you think that, you're in deep trouble. So constantly, just like you would go to the gym or whatever to strengthen your muscles, you have to strengthen your faith, and you do that through prayer and reading these reminders that Allah Ta'ala gives us in Holy Quran. And you look at all the prophets mentioned in Quran. I can hardly think of a prophet that didn't have a trial. Hazrat Ibrahim, he was thrown in the fire. He was told to leave his young son and wife alone in the desert, not a blade of grass, not a drop of rain, and to just walk away. And he was, just because, commandment. He was told to drive a stake in the heart of his son's chest. No explanation. Commandment. Obviously, it was a metaphor. Hazrat Isa alayhi salam was put on the cross and in such pain that he passed out. Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam went through the trial of the flood. Jonah, Hazrat Yunus, was swallowed, belly of the whale, and Yusuf alayhi salam was thrown in a well and left for dead by his own brothers, his own blood brothers. These are astonishing trials. Hazrat Musa alayhi salam wandered the desert for 40 years with his complaining, I should say. They complained, his ummah. What a trial. 40 years in the desert. his mother was commanded by God to put Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, when he was just but a child, an infant, in a reed basket, and she was told to just push him into the river Nile. I mean, that is, can you imagine that? Because obviously the Egyptian soldiers were chasing, and something had to be done, and God told her what to do, and that's what it was. Imagine the kind of patience and reliance on prayer and faith in God that she had to have, and the thoughts that ran through her head. And this is real life. And it's a lot better for you to live your life with those understandings and live every day that way than, you know, getting lost on social media and whatever it is, that the vanity that we constantly consume. So Motam Saab, I can continue or I can stop here um, and take questions, or I don't know what the limit is on time either, but I do appreciate everybody listening. And I'll also say this, though, that a lot of people pray for us that we don't realize are praying for us. And I realized this when I was in the hospital, and people are saying that they're praying for a long time and they pray every day and all this. I felt very bad, because how does one return prayers like that? You can't. And so it's important for us to do durood, because in durood everyone uh, is included. It's one of the most comprehensive prayers you can do. And when you do durood, you pray for everybody, because everybody is the family and children of Muhammad that's here at Jalsa and all over the world, Hamdi Jamaat. so so you should do durood, and and anytime I was telling you about making prayers to God, which are deeply personal, and to use your own imagination. And by the way, a secret look into that life, if you read the poems of the Prophet Messiah Islam, that's where you really see what the fragrance of prayers is supposed to smell like. Masih Maud al-Islam is telling us how to pray. Read his poetry, as Muslim out's poetry, very similar. He talks about how, God, take me up into your lap like a child. You know, I am but a desperate child. I'm hungry. I'm crying. I'm helpless. I'm vulnerable. Wrap me in your blanket. Uh, these are the ways that we really should be praying. And you find that it is poetry. What I was saying earlier about when you pray, it's most important for you to pray appropriately. So dua it does not have the same value if you don't do salat. Okay, your personal prayers, you should always begin with, I at least do, and I know uh, others, Surah Fatiha, Durud Sharif. There's a number of prayers, formal prayers, Quran prayers, that I and others may do before you do your own prayers, and that's very important for you to do. And those prayers take priority over your own words. But once you've done them, you should use your own words. I think that's enough, perhaps for now, at least.
Uh,
Motam Saab.
Ji, Jazakallah, Bilal bhai, that was extremely faith inspiring, and I just think we do have some time for questions. I can start with one, and we'll inshallah allow the audience to also ask any question they would like to ask. I just want to start with asking that I know you touched upon it a little bit, but how did Khilafat played a role in your trial and still is playing that role?
Well, it's interesting. I just left to see Hazud when I came back, and I think it uncovered the illness, the stress of the travel, is what prompted me to to get seen by the doctor. When I came back that very week was when the diagnosis happened. Look, I wrote to Hazur frequently, and sometimes once a week, even. And responses. I got responses as well. And it's personal. I think that everyone, it's very important for you to ask Hazur for prayers. I think everybody knows that. But do we really do it? And that's it. It's very, very important. In fact, I did get a response. I'll share a little bit. One thing that I didn't do was that Hazur reminded me to give sadaqah before going for surgery, and so I had not thought about that. And so I managed, however, still to do that. So you never know what type of blessing you'll get. So and of course afterwards, updating Hazur. And so if you're whatever trial you have or exam or rishta, look, this isn't the only trial of and challenge that I or any of you have seen. So college admission, graduate school admission, children, not having children, getting a job, getting fired from work, all of these trials and difficulties in life, you should write Khalifatul Masih. You can keep your letter brief, and it's easier. It can be easier for Hazur. You can have details. I'm not saying that you should, but to an extent, and write to him frequently. Visit Hazur. Like I mentioned, I had visited Hazur right before the diagnosis happened. That was completely voluntary, and it's a choice that you have to deliberately make and room in your schedule to go to Hazur. No one's going to tell you to do it. You're gonna have you have to decide on your own. Like I said, you make this choice. I'm going to be an Ahmadi if I'm going to be it. I'm going to be all in. I'm going to be a devoted servant of Khalifatul Masih. That's it, and that's my way to God. And I mean, Khulafa have said this. I mean, all doors to God have been closed. Now it's all through Jamaat. Ahmadiyyat, this is the prophecy of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And in latter days, the way to God will be through this community. And Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi Islam is like Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam come again, and Khilafat has come again. And so all other avenues have lost the potency that they had. And now if you want to get to God, you have to go through this Jamaat, and that means having obedience to Nizam-e-Jamaat and Nizam-e-Khilafat, and having love for him, and not just writing him, but also listening to him. I can't tell you how much comfort I got just by, in the hospital, I would take this phone that I have in my hand, go to YouTube, and just watch Hazur talk with children and answer their questions, put the phone on my shoulder, and just listen. And it gave me great comfort during times when I couldn't sleep. And hospitals are no place for rest. And, you get pokes. I had my chest open. I have a large scar here. And there's a lot of pain. And I have a bad habit of not being able to ask for pain medicine for some reason. And I just white knuckle it, which is not good. But I tell you, when I would pray, most of all, that was my real narcotic. I literally, there was a pain in front of me. There was a pain scale, 1 to 10 with smiley faces or whatever. Like you've seen those before. Whenever I would be done with prayer, I would feel so much better. My pain score, no medicine, So prayer, that's the real thing. That is the real antidepressant. Just a point before the next question, if I may, on depression and anxiety. It's okay to feel anxious. It's not as okay to feel depressed, because or at least if you do, there shouldn't be mayusi, there shouldn't be despair. You shouldn't despair of Allah Ta'ala. You should always have hope. And if you have hope, it's not true depression that you're feeling. Okay. Anxiety is okay, Hazur has explained this, because prophets have been anxious for their people and for good reason. He gave the example of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who, after he was visited by the angel Gabriel, he was in a state of anxiety. And we read about this in Surah Muzammil. He says, wrap thyself, O thou who has wrapped thyself in thy mantle. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact translation, but Hazrat Khadija wrapped him in a mantle and allayed his anxieties. He felt very anxious. The night before Badr, he prayed in great anxiety. What will happen if these men fall tomorrow? Who will be left to glorify your name? Even the companions were a bit perturbed. Why is the prophet anxious? God has promised him. And he said, look, he may have promised us, but that doesn't mean there can't be some kami, some loss on our side. There could be loss of lives. That doesn't mean that blessings can't be delayed, for example. So there's great cause for anxiety. There should be a sense of anxiety. Anxiety is what prompts us to do better. And Hazrat Musa alayhi salam was anxious. The Holy Quran mentions when he was with Pharaoh and there was the magicians. They were using the curtains and which looked like snakes, and he was anxious. And God told him to throw the rod and to have no fear. Ayat Istikhlaf in Holy Quran talks about fear. So anxiety, if you have it, is okay, but you should turn to prayer for that anxiety. It's not the solution for everybody in every case. I understand. I mean, it is, but I'm saying it's not the only solution. Some people may need medication, but those should be the exception, and that should not be the rule. Okay, the rule should be that you should find your comfort and your medicine in prayer. And Jazakallah, and if there's questions, I can take another one.
Yeah, sure. If you have a question, you can come up here and ask in the microphone if you like. Anybody? All right, so we'll have 1 second.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Armagan. How do you know the difference between God sending you a message or just a mere coincidence?
I don't know if you can truly know, but I think it's a decision that that's something you decide. You make the choice whether this was something that Allah Ta'ala was trying to tell me, he was winking at me, or whatever. And it's the same question that anybody faces whenever they see a sign. Is this something that Allah Ta'ala has sent or not? And I think a disbeliever denies it and a believer believes it. So that doesn't mean that you're going to be 100% right in every case. But if you have an inclined nature toward God, you will have a tendency to, when you know that God accepts prayers and that God is compassionate and that God answers prayers and that you've been praying in the manner that he expects you to pray, and in the manner that gets prayers accepted, and you see a blessing, then how can you think otherwise? Otherwise, you will always doubt God. You'll never give him credit for answering your prayers. You'll always try and find something or attribute credit to something else. the ambiguity of this life, that Allah Ta'ala is not obvious, and that there's a small shadow of doubt, is there on purpose. And it's for this reason, which makes us even ask this question. Because it's to distinguish between the believer and the disbeliever. How else can you otherwise, how do you distinguish a believer and a disbeliever? You have to have a leap of faith. And that's what I was saying earlier, is that
Wait, I think your microphone got muted or Assalamualaikum Bilal bhai.
Ji, walaikum salam.
Your connection just went off for a second, but it's back on. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, walaikum salam. I'm not sure where I cut off.
No, think
I was saying that once you've decided, once you've done your research and you've decided that Islam makes rational sense, that this is a religion revealed by God, that the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was truthful, now you accept everything. And you begin, lost my train for a second. You begin to have faith. So when Allah Ta'ala answers a prayer of yours, there's this moment where you're thinking, well, was this just a coincidence? You know, I prayed for this, I worked really hard, I passed my test. Maybe it was my hard work, maybe it was, you know, and
all right. I think we lost Bilal bhai for a second.